She crashed a Mafia wedding by mistake, and the Mafia boss said, "You're mine now." The rain hit Maya's face like tiny needles as she stumbled down the narrow alley, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear Marcus's voice echoing off the brick walls, closer than she'd hoped. "Maya! Don't make this harder than it needs to be!" His voice carried that familiar edge, the one that used to make her freeze in terror. But tonight was different. Tonight she'd finally found the courage to leave, clutching nothing but her purse and the clothes on her back. The purple bruises on her wrists were still fresh from their last conversation, 3 days ago, hidden beneath the sleeves of her jacket. She pressed herself against the cold brick wall, trying to catch her breath. The city seemed to close in around her, tall buildings stretching endlessly upward like prison walls. Where could she go? Her sister lived 2 states away, and Marcus knew all her friends. He'd made sure of that over the past 2 years, slowly cutting her off from everyone who might help. The sound of footsteps splashing through puddles made her blood turn to ice. He was getting closer. Maya's eyes darted desperately around the street. Most of the buildings were dark, their windows staring down at her like empty eyes. But then she saw it, a grand limestone building with warm golden light spilling from its tall windows. People in elegant clothing were walking up the wide stone steps, disappearing through massive oak doors decorated with white roses and flowing ribbons. A wedding. Without thinking, Maya pushed herself off the wall and ran toward the light. Her sneakers slipped on the wet pavement, but she didn't slow down. Behind her, Marcus's voice grew louder. "I can see you, baby! Come back here! You know you can't hide from me!" The doormen at the entrance were distracted, greeting guests and checking names on clipboards. Maya slipped past them in the crowd, her plain jeans and damp jacket a stark contrast to the flowing gowns and sharp tuxedos around her. Nobody seemed to notice one more person in the sea of wedding guests. Inside, the building took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from a vaulted ceiling painted with angels and clouds. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the warm candlelight from hundreds of white tapers. The air smelled of expensive perfume and white lilies. Maya found herself swept along with the crowd toward what looked like a chapel. Her hands were shaking as she slipped into a pew near the back, trying to make herself invisible. Around her, the guests whispered in hushed, reverent tones, but something about their conversations made the hair on her arms stand up. "The Torino family's been waiting for this alliance for months," murmured an elderly woman in diamonds. "Smart move by the boss," replied her companion. "This marriage will secure the Eastern Territories." Territories? Maya's stomach dropped. She looked around more carefully, noticing things she'd missed in her panic. The men all seemed to have the same watchful eyes, the same way of standing that suggested they were used to violence. Many had subtle bulges beneath their expensive jackets that could only be weapons. Oh God! What kind of wedding had she crashed into? But before she could process this fully, the massive doors behind her creaked open. Maya's blood turned to ice as she heard a familiar voice talking to someone just outside. "Excuse me, sir, I'm looking for my girlfriend. About 5'4", brown hair, wearing jeans. She's not well. Needs her medication. Marcus." He'd found her. Maya sank lower in the pew, her breathing coming in short gasps. The elderly woman next to her gave her a sharp look, taking in her casual clothes and obvious distress. Maya could practically see the wheels turning in the woman's head. She didn't belong here. The chapel had gone quiet. At the altar, a bride in a stunning white gown stood next to a nervous-looking groom. But Maya's attention was caught by the man standing behind them, clearly the one officiating this unusual ceremony. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair slicked back and eyes like chips of black ice. His tuxedo looked like it cost more than Maya made in 6 months, and when he looked out over the congregation, every person in the room seemed to hold their breath. This had to be the boss they'd been whispering about. And right now, those cold eyes were scanning the crowd with the intensity of a predator. When his gaze reached Maya's section, she tried to make herself smaller, but it was too late. His eyes locked onto hers, and she saw something flicker in his expression: curiosity, calculation, and something else she couldn't identify. Behind her, she could hear Marcus's voice getting closer as he sweet-talked his way past the doorman. "She's confused, you understand? Sometimes she gets these episodes." The lies came so easily to him. Maya felt sick remembering all the times he'd used that same caring, worried tone to explain away her bruises to doctors, to convince her friends that she was fragile and needed his protection. She was trapped. If she tried to leave now, she'd walk right into Marcus's arms. But staying meant sitting in a room full of dangerous strangers who were already suspicious of her presence. The boss was still watching her, and Maya realized with growing terror that her desperate escape had landed her in something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. But as Marcus's voice grew louder behind her, she knew she had no choice but to stay and hope these criminals were somehow less dangerous than the devils she'd been running from. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to escape one nightmare, she might have just walked into another. The whispers started like ripples in a pond, spreading from pew to pew as more guests noticed Maya's presence. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, studying her cheap jacket and the way her hands trembled in her lap. "Who is she?" hissed a woman in red silk, not bothering to lower her voice. "Never seen her before," came the reply from across the aisle. "Look at those clothes. Security should have caught this," growled a man with scars across his knuckles. Maya's cheeks burned with shame, but she couldn't move. Through the chapel doors behind her, she could still hear Marcus working his charm on the doorman. Any moment now, he would walk through those doors and spot her. The thought made her stomach clench with familiar dread. At the altar, the bride, a stunning woman with platinum blonde hair, had gone rigid. Her perfectly painted red lips were pressed into a thin line as she too noticed the disturbance in the congregation. The groom looked confused, glancing between his bride and the crowd. But it was the boss who commanded everyone's attention. He stood perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that made her feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. There was something calculating in his expression, as if he was solving a complex puzzle in real time. Maya tried to shrink further into the pew, but the elderly woman beside her had begun pointing her out to others. The whispers grew louder. "She doesn't belong here. How did she get past security? Someone should remove her." That's when Maya heard it, Marcus's voice, closer now, just outside the chapel doors. "I'm telling you, she's sick. She needs help. Just let me check inside quickly." Panic flooded Maya's system. Her breathing became shallow, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. This was it. She was trapped between a room full of criminals and the man who had made her life hell for 2 years. The boss must have seen the terror in her face because something shifted in his expression. His cold eyes narrowed, not with suspicion but with understanding. In that moment, Maya realized he could see exactly what she was, a desperate woman running from something worse than the danger she'd stumbled into. The chapel doors began to creak open. That's when the boss moved. "Stop," he said, and his voice cut through the whispers like a blade. The entire chapel fell silent. Even the bride turned to stare at him. He stepped away from the altar, his movements fluid and controlled. Every eye in the room followed him as he walked down the aisle toward Maya's pew. The guests parted like the Red Sea, pressing themselves back to give him space. Maya's heart hammered so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. What was he doing? Was he going to have her thrown out? Handed over to Marcus? The boss stopped directly beside her pew. Up close, he was even more intimidating, tall enough that she had to crane her neck to look at him, with the kind of presence that made the air feel charged. His cologne was expensive, and there was a thin scar running along his jawline that spoke of violence in his past. Behind them, the chapel doors swung open. Maya's blood turned to ice as she heard Marcus's familiar footsteps on the marble floor. "Excuse me, I'm looking for. She's mine now." The boss's words rang out clear and final, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He didn't shout them or make a show of it. He simply stated them like an undeniable fact, the way someone might announce the weather. Maya's mouth fell open. The entire congregation seemed to stop breathing. Marcus's footsteps halted abruptly. "I'm sorry, what?" The boss turned slowly, and Maya followed his gaze to see Marcus standing in the doorway, his fake concerned expression faltering as he took in the scene before him. Marcus was tall and athletic, the kind of man who was used to intimidating others. But next to the boss, he looked like a child playing dress-up. "I said she's mine," the boss repeated, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to settle into the very stones of the building. "Is there a problem with that?" The bride at the altar had gone pale, her bouquet trembling in her hands. The groom looked like he might faint. But none of the guests seemed surprised by this turn of events. If anything, they looked relieved that their boss had taken control of the situation. Marcus opened his mouth, probably to launch into his practiced speech about Maya's condition, but the words died on his lips as he really looked around the chapel. Even he wasn't stupid enough to miss the signs, the watchful men in expensive suits, the way everyone deferred to the boss, the atmosphere of barely contained violence. I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus stammered. "No misunderstanding," the boss said coolly. "She's exactly where she belongs." He extended his hand to Maya, palm up, waiting. It was both an invitation and a command. Maya stared at his hand, strong fingers, a platinum ring that caught the candlelight, no wedding band. This was insane. She didn't even know his name. But as she looked up into his face, she saw something unexpected in those cold eyes. Protection. He was offering to shield her from Marcus, even if she didn't understand the cost. Maya placed her trembling hand in his. The boss's fingers closed around hers, warm and surprisingly gentle. He helped her stand, then pulled her against his side with practiced ease, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. His arm around her waist was solid and reassuring. "As I was saying," he continued, addressing the chapel as if nothing unusual had happened, "we're here to celebrate a union." But everyone knew the real union that had just taken place wasn't the one at the altar. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, his eyes darting between Maya and the boss. She could see the familiar anger building in his face, the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched. It was the look that usually preceded his worst outbursts. But something was different this time. For the first time in 2 years, Marcus looked uncertain. Afraid, even. "Maya," he said, trying to inject warmth into his voice. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home. You know you don't belong here." The boss's arm tightened slightly around Maya's waist. She could feel the controlled strength in his grip, the way his body had subtly shifted to place himself between her and Marcus. When he spoke, his voice was silk wrapped around steel. "The lady seems quite comfortable where she is. Look, I don't know who you are." Marcus started, taking a step forward. "But Maya is my girlfriend. She's having one of her episodes. She gets confused sometimes." Maya flinched at the familiar lies, but the boss's presence beside her felt like a wall of protection. She found herself standing straighter, drawing strength from his unwavering confidence. "Episodes?" The boss's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. Around them, the wedding guests seemed to lean forward, sensing violence in the air like sharks scenting blood. Marcus must have finally registered the mood of the room because he stopped advancing. His eyes swept over the congregation again, taking in their expensive clothes, their cold expressions, the way they all watched the boss with a mixture of respect and fear. We should go," Marcus said, backing toward the door. I'll be in touch, Maya." The threat in his words was clear, but for once, Maya didn't feel the familiar stab of terror. The boss's presence seemed to neutralize Marcus's power over her completely. "No," the boss said simply. "You won't." Something in his tone made Marcus's face go pale. Without another word, he turned and fled, leaving the chapel doors swinging behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya realized she was shaking, not from fear but from relief so intense it made her dizzy. After 2 years of living in constant terror, Marcus had just walked away from her. Actually walked away. But as the initial euphoria faded, reality began to set in. She was now standing in the protective embrace of a man she didn't know, surrounded by people who clearly lived outside the law. The wedding guests were still staring at her with undisguised curiosity and suspicion. The boss seemed to sense her growing anxiety. He nodded once to the congregation, and somehow that simple gesture conveyed everything they needed to know. The ceremony resumed as if nothing had happened. "My apologies for the interruption," he said to the bride and groom, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly sorry. "Please continue." As the official began speaking again, the boss guided Maya toward a side door she hadn't noticed before. His hand remained on the small of her back, not controlling, but clearly marking her as under his protection. Maya caught snippets of whispered conversations as they passed. "The boss's new woman. She's under his protection now. Nobody will touch her." The words should have been comforting, but they sent a chill down Maya's spine. She was being claimed, labeled, categorized in a world she didn't understand. The boss led her through the side door into what appeared to be a private office. Rich mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive desk that probably cost more than her yearly salary. He closed the door behind them, and suddenly the silence felt heavy, intimate. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his desk. Maya perched on the edge of the seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Now that they were alone, the boss seemed even more imposing. He moved to pour himself a drink from a crystal decanter, the amber liquid catching the light. "Drink?" he offered. Maya shook her head. Her throat felt too tight to swallow anything. The boss settled into his chair, studying her over the rim of his glass. His earlier calculating expression had returned, and Maya felt like she was being evaluated for purchase. "So," he said finally, "who are you, and why did fate decide to drop you into my wedding?" "It's not my wedding," Maya said quickly, then flushed at how stupid that sounded. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt anything. I was just running," he finished. "From the man who just left." "Your boyfriend," he claimed. "Ex-boyfriend," Maya corrected, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "As of tonight." Something flickered in the boss's dark eyes. "Ah. And what exactly were you running from?" Maya's hand unconsciously moved to her wrist, where the bruises were hidden beneath her sleeves. The boss's gaze followed the movement, and his expression hardened. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, you've certainly found yourself in an interesting position, haven't you? The moment I claimed you out there, you became untouchable in this city. No one will hurt you now." Relief flooded through Maya, but it was quickly followed by wariness. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." The boss smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Let's just say I have my reasons. But understand this, protection comes with a price. You're safe now, but you're also mine. The people out there heard me claim you. In their world, that means something." Maya felt the room spin slightly. "What kind of something?" "It means you belong to me now. You're under my care, my authority, my protection. And in return..." He paused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Well, we'll figure that out as we go." The weight of what she'd stumbled into was starting to sink in. She'd escaped one cage only to find herself in another, prettier, more luxurious, but a cage nonetheless. "I don't understand any of this," Maya whispered. "You will," the boss said, his voice oddly gentle. "My name is Vincent Torino. And whether you realize it or not, you just became the most protected woman in this city." But as Maya looked into his eyes, she wondered if she'd also become the most trapped. 3 days had passed since the wedding, and Maya was beginning to understand what Vincent meant by protection. She'd been moved into a penthouse apartment that probably cost more per month than she used to make in a year. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, but she noticed they were bulletproof. The door had 3 different locks, and there was always a man in an expensive suit stationed in the lobby. Vincent had been attentive but distant, checking on her welfare while keeping his true intentions carefully hidden. He provided her with a new wardrobe, elegant dresses and designer clothes that made her feel like she was playing dress up. But every gift came with an unspoken reminder: she belonged to him now. Maya was trying to read in the living room when her phone rang. The number was blocked, but she knew who it was before she answered. "Hello, Maya." Marcus's voice made her skin crawl, but for the first time, she didn't feel that familiar spike of terror. Vincent's protection was real, she could feel it like a shield around her. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to talk. I've been doing some research on your new friend." Maya's blood chilled. "What kind of research?" "Vincent Torino. Interesting family history. Did you know his father was gunned down outside a restaurant when Vincent was 16? And his uncle mysteriously disappeared last year after a disagreement about territory?" Despite herself, Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She'd sensed Vincent was dangerous, but hearing the details made it real in a way that frightened her. "You're in over your head, baby," Marcus continued, his voice taking on that familiar manipulative tone. "This isn't some romance novel. These people are killers. They'll use you up and throw you away. At least they don't hit me," Maya said quietly. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was cold. "You think you're safe? I've been watching. I know where you live now. I know your routine. And I know that Vincent Torino has enemies, lots of them. What happens when one of them decides to use you to get to him?" Maya's hands began to shake. "You're just trying to scare me. Am I? There's a war brewing, Maya. The Eastern Territories are in dispute, and your precious boss has painted a target on his back. And now, by extension, on yours." Before Maya could respond, the line went dead. She sat staring at the phone, Marcus's words echoing in her head. Part of her wanted to dismiss his threats as manipulation, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd learned something real, something dangerous. That evening, Vincent arrived for what had become their daily dinner ritual. Maya had grown to appreciate these moments. He was intelligent, surprisingly well-read, and when he smiled genuinely it transformed his entire face. But tonight she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's call. "You're quiet tonight," Vincent observed, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. Everything he did was controlled, measured. Maya pushed her food around her plate. Marcus called. Vincent's fork paused halfway to his mouth. When he looked at her, his eyes had gone cold. "What did he want?" "He's been researching you. Your family. He knows things." "What kind of things?" Maya repeated Marcus's words about Vincent's father and uncle. As she spoke, she watched Vincent's expression grow progressively darker. By the time she finished, the temperature in the room seemed to have dropped 10 degrees. "He's trying to scare you," Vincent said finally, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Is he lying?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, twirling his wine glass between his fingers. "No. He's not lying." The simple admission hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd known Vincent was dangerous, but hearing him confirm the violence in his past made it real in a way that terrified her. "My father was killed when I was 16. Vincent continued, his voice carefully neutral. "By a rival family who wanted to expand into our territory. My uncle disagreed with some of my business decisions last year. He's no longer a problem." Maya's appetite disappeared completely. "Did you kill him?" Vincent's smile was cold and beautiful and terrifying. "I don't discuss business with civilians." But his non-answer was answer enough. Maya realized she was sitting across from a man who could order deaths as easily as he ordered dinner. The thought should have sent her running, but where could she go? Marcus was still out there, and now he was actively hunting her. "He knows where I live," she said quietly. "I know." Vincent's voice had taken on that dangerous edge she was learning to recognize. "He's been asking questions, making inquiries. My men have been tracking his movements." Maya looked up sharply. "Your men? Did you think I'd leave you unprotected? There are always 2 of my people watching this building. Marcus hasn't made a move without me knowing about it." The revelation should have been comforting, But instead it made Maya feel like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. So what happens now? Vincent leaned back in his chair, and Maya saw something calculating in his expression. Now Marcus has become useful to me. Useful how? He's been asking questions about me, stirring up interest in my business affairs. That kind of attention tends to make my enemies bold. Vincent's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. And when enemies get bold, they make mistakes. Maya felt sick as the implication sank in. You're using me as bait. I'm using the situation to my advantage, Vincent corrected. Your ex-boyfriend's interference has created an opportunity. My rivals think I'm distracted, focused on protecting my new asset. They'll underestimate me. Asset? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. Vincent reached across the table and took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. You're more than that to me, Maya. But to the outside world, you're a weakness they think they can exploit. Let them think it. Maya stared at their joined hands, realizing the full scope of what she'd stumbled into. She wasn't just protected, she was a weapon in Vincent's war, whether she wanted to be or not. And Marcus, in his determination to get her back, was playing right into Vincent's plans. What if I won out? She asked quietly. Vincent's thumb stroked across her knuckles, and his voice was soft when he answered. There is no out, Maya. Not anymore. But I promise you this, I'll keep you safe. Whatever it costs. As Maya looked into his eyes, she realized she was beginning to believe him. And that terrified her more than anything Marcus could do. The explosion of violence came exactly 1 week later, on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Maya was in Vincent's private restaurant, a place he'd brought her for lunch, claiming it was the safest spot in his territory. The dining room was elegant and intimate, with only a handful of tables occupied by well-dressed patrons who all seemed to know each other. Vincent's men were stationed discreetly around the room, their presence both comforting and ominous. She was beginning to relax, even laugh at one of Vincent's dry observations about the city's politics, when the front door burst open. Marcus strode in like he owned the place, flanked by 3 men Maya had never seen before. They moved with the same predatory confidence as Vincent's people, but there was something desperate in their eyes that made her blood run cold. Vincent Torino, Marcus called out, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent restaurant. I've come to collect what's mine. Vincent didn't even flinch. He continued cutting his pasta with methodical precision, not bothering to look up. I don't recall inviting you to lunch. Cut the act, Marcus snarled, advancing toward their table. You think I don't know what this is really about? You think I'm stupid? Now Vincent did look up, and his smile was razor-sharp. Well, since you asked? Maya watched in horrified fascination as Marcus's face flushed red with rage. She'd seen that look before. It was the precursor to his worst violence. But this time, she wasn't cowering alone in their apartment. Vincent's presence beside her felt like armor. You're using her, Marcus continued, his voice rising. Maya's just a pawn in your little territorial war, isn't she? A way to flush out your enemies? Maya's stomach dropped. How could Marcus possibly know that? Vincent's expression didn't change, but Maya caught the slight tightening around his eyes. You've been busy. I told you I'd been doing research. Your rivals are very chatty when they think someone might be useful to them. Marcus's grin was triumphant and ugly. The Castellano family, the Russians on 5th Street, they all want you dead. And they all think your precious Maya is the key to getting close to you. Maya felt the world tilt around her. What are you talking about? Marcus turned to her, and for a moment, his expression almost looked genuine. He's been using you from the beginning, baby. That whole rescue at the wedding? Pure calculation. He knew having you close would make his enemies careless, give him the advantage he needed. Vincent's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You're out of line. Am I? Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, his men positioning themselves behind him. Tell her, Vincent. Tell Maya how you've been feeding information to your enemies through me. How every romantic dinner, Every protective gesture has been carefully orchestrated to make them think you're weak, distracted. Maya's breathing became shallow. Is that true? For the first time since she'd known him, Vincent hesitated. And in that hesitation, Maya saw the truth. Son of a bitch, she whispered. Vincent reached for her hand, but she yanked it away. Maya, let me explain. You used me. The words came out flat, emotionless. All of this, the protection, the apartment, the dinners, it was all just part of your plan. It started that way, Vincent admitted, and Maya felt something break inside her chest. But nothing. Maya stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Around them, she could see Vincent's men shifting nervously, hands moving toward concealed weapons. You're just as manipulative as he is. Marcus leaned back with a satisfied smirk. Now you see what I've been trying to tell you. Come on, Maya. Let's go home. No, Maya's voice was stronger than she'd expected. I'm not going anywhere with you either. Both men stared at her in surprise. You're both liars, she continued, feeling a strange sense of clarity washing over her. Marcus, you put your hands on me for 2 years and called it love. And Vincent, you manipulated me into being your weapon and called it protection. Maya. Vincent started, but she cut him off. I'm done being used by both of you. That's when Marcus made his mistake. He reached for her arm, his fingers closing around her wrist exactly where he used to leave bruises. You're coming with me whether you like it or not. The contact triggered something primal in Maya. 2 years of suppressed rage erupted all at once. She grabbed a steak knife from the table and slashed at Marcus's hand, opening a deep gash across his knuckles. Don't touch me, she screamed. Marcus recoiled, blood dripping onto the white tablecloth. His face twisted with fury, and Maya saw him reach inside his jacket. She knew that movement. He'd always claimed he didn't carry weapons, but she'd suspected otherwise. But Vincent was faster. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Marcus dropped without a sound, a neat hole in the center of his forehead. His men went for their weapons, but Vincent's people were already moving. The restaurant erupted into chaos, shouts, gunfire, the crash of breaking glass. Maya stood frozen in the center of it all, still holding the bloody knife, watching the man who had terrorized her for years bleed out on an expensive carpet. She felt nothing. No relief, no horror, just a strange emptiness. When the shooting stopped, Vincent was beside her, his hands on her shoulders. Maya, are you hurt? She looked up at him, this man who had saved her and used her in equal measure. You killed him! He was going to kill you! Vincent said simply. Maya nodded slowly. Around them, Vincent's men were efficiently cleaning up the mess, making phone calls, handling the aftermath with practiced ease. She realized this was her life now, violence and protection intertwined, safety that came at the cost of other people's blood. The Castellanos will be here within the hour, one of Vincent's lieutenants reported. They think you're vulnerable now. This was their move. Vincent's smile was cold as winter. Perfect. Let them come. Maya understood then that this had all been part of his plan, even Marcus's death, even her own rebellion. Vincent had orchestrated everything, including her moment of defiance, to draw his enemies into the open. She should have felt betrayed, furious, terrified. Instead, she felt something unexpected, admiration. Vincent Torino was the most dangerous man she'd ever met, and somehow, that no longer frightened her. It excited her. The Castellano family arrived exactly 47 minutes later, just as Vincent had predicted. Maya watched from the restaurant's upstairs window as black SUVs pulled up outside, disgorging men in dark suits who moved with lethal precision. Vincent stood beside her, calm as still water, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. 12 men, he observed. Antonio Castellano himself. He must think this is his moment. Is it? Maya asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Vincent's smile was sharp as a blade. What do you think? Below them, Maya could see Vincent's own men taking positions in the shadows, outnumbering the Castellanos 3-1. But this wasn't just about numbers. This was about sending a message that would echo through the city's underworld. I want you to understand something, Vincent said, turning to face her fully. Everything that's happened, Marcus finding you, his research, his threats, I could have ended it quietly weeks ago. One phone call, and he would have simply disappeared. Maya felt her pulse quicken. Why didn't you? Because I needed my enemies to believe I was vulnerable. Distracted. They needed to think that loving you had made me weak. His eyes searched her face. But the truth is, Maya, somewhere along the way, the lie became real. Before Maya could process what he meant, the front door of the restaurant exploded inward. Antonio Castellano strode in like he owned the place, his expensive suit immaculate despite the violence he'd clearly come to deliver. He was older than Vincent, with silver hair and the kind of face that had ordered 1,000 deaths without losing a moment's sleep. Vincent, he called out. Come down and face me like a man. Vincent squeezed Maya's hand once, then headed for the stairs. But Maya found herself following, drawn by something she couldn't name. She moved quietly, keeping to the shadows at the top of the staircase where she could see everything but remain hidden. Vincent descended with unhurried grace, his hands visible and empty. Around the dining room, she could see his men in position, but they held their fire, waiting for his signal. Antonio, Vincent said pleasantly. You're late for lunch. Cut the games, Torino. You've been baiting us for weeks with this charade. The girl, the vulnerability, the distraction, very clever. But it ends tonight. Vincent tilted his head. Does it? That's when Maya saw Antonio's fatal mistake. His eyes flicked upward, scanning for Vincent's men, and she realized he'd brought his own snipers. Red laser dots appeared on Vincent's chest from multiple angles. They thought they had him. Maya moved without thinking. The emergency fire alarm was mounted on the wall beside her, and she slammed her palm against it. The shrieking siren filled the air, and in the split second of confusion that followed, Vincent dove behind the bar as his men opened fire. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Gunfire shattered windows and splintered wood. Maya pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering as she watched the battle unfold below. She'd just chosen a side, actively participated in a war she'd stumbled into by accident. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. When the smoke cleared, Antonio Castellano lay dead beside his men, and Vincent's people were already moving to secure the scene. Vincent appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Pride, gratitude, and something deeper that made her breath catch. That was either very brave or very stupid, he called up to her. Probably both, Maya replied, walking down to meet him. When she reached the bottom step, Vincent caught her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, reverent, completely at odds with the violence that surrounded them. You saved my life, he said quietly. You saved mine first. That was business. His thumb traced her cheekbone. This is personal. Maya looked around at the carnage, the bodies, the blood, the shattered glass, and felt a strange sense of completion. She'd gone from victim to survivor to participant. This world of violence and power no longer frightened her because she understood it now. More than that, she belonged to it. So what happens now? She asked. Vincent's smile was different this time, not calculating or cold, but genuine. Now the city knows that Vincent Torino's woman is not to be underestimated. They'll think twice before coming for either of us again. Vincent Torino's woman? He pulled her closer, until she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. If that's what you want to be. Maya thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The abuse she'd fled, the protection she'd found, the manipulation she'd discovered, and the choice she'd made to embrace this dangerous new world. Ask me properly, she said. Vincent laughed, and the sound was rich and warm in the aftermath of violence. Maya Chen, will you be mine? Not as a pawn or a weapon or a shield, but as my partner, my equal, my queen? Maya kissed him then, tasting danger and promise on his lips. Around them, his men were cleaning up the mess, making the evidence disappear, preparing for whatever came next. But she wasn't afraid anymore. I'm yours, she said against his mouth. But this time, it means something different. Yes, Vincent agreed, his arms tightening around her. This time, it means everything. As sirens wailed in the distance and Vincent's people completed their work, Maya realized her story wasn't about escaping one cage for another. It was about finding the strength to choose her own prison, and then discovering it wasn't a prison at all. It was home. She crashed a Mafia wedding by mistake, and the Mafia boss said, "You're mine now."